Okay, guys, welcome back to COSC 1437. Just a second. We're going to cover chapter 5, which is the second part of the control structures, which is the repetition. Okay, here we go. Just 1 second. Okay. So the repetition structure is loops. And we're going to look at the different types of loops that are available for us to use in Java. So here's the syntax. This is the very first loop. This is the while loop. So we're going to have an expression here, just like we had for the conditions, and then we have a statement. So the expression is always true in an infinite loop. So while this is true, then the loop is going to keep iterating. So something has to make that loop false to make the loop stop. So this is what the how we would actually flowchart the loop. We would go into it, we would check to see if the expression is true. If the expression is true, we go here. And then if it's, we check again. If it's true, we keep repeating while true. Once this logical expression is false, then we'll get to exit the loop. So here's an example, and I'm going to go ahead and enter the example. I'm going to copy this, and let's just run it. Oops. So the loops are actually something that students have the most difficulty mastering. So when I look at test data and how well or how not well students do, understanding loops is the hardest part for some reason. So what would be good for you to do is to type in loops and practice just seeing what they do if you change certain things. So in this example, it says while I is less than or equal to 20, print out I and a space. Now here we're incrementing I by 5. So this line right here is what's going to make that loop stop. So once it gets to 25, then the loop is going to stop and it will not print 25. So what this is going to print is first is going to be 0. 0 is less than or equal to 20. So it's going to print the 0. Then it's going to increment by 5. So it'll print 5, 10, 15, 20. It increments to 25. So it goes up to 25, but it does not print it. So 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. Now what I'm going to do here is after it prints that, after it's done, so here's where the loop stops. Here's an open and a close brace. There are 2 statements in here, so that's why we have to have a code block. If I did not put, if I deleted the open and the close brace, then what would happen is that it would just iterate this, and it would not do this line until the end, but there will never be an end. So it's just going to keep going. It's going to be an infinite loop, and it's going to look like this. So it's going to be 0, and I'm going to make it stop. It's going to be 0. 0 is less than or equal to 20. It's going to print the 0, and it's just going to go back up to the while. And it's just check again is 0 less than or equal to 20. So this never happens. So we need to have this and that. Now, once we exit, let's go ahead and print what I equals to. So let's do I. So once it's finished, I just want to see what I has at the end. So it prints, with this print statement, it prints 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. With this print statement, when it exits the loop, I is 25. That's just good to know in case you're ever wanting to use this variable after you've gone through the loop. It's good to know that it's a different number than what you thought, what you were expecting. Okay, so that's the while loop. The while loop checks at the top, and it never enters the loop if this is not true the first time. So this has to be true the first time. Okay. We have while, logical expression, update the loop inside. So there's a counter control while loop. It says used when exact number of data or entry pieces is known. So you could have a counter and you could increase the counter and go from like 1 to 10 if you wanted. So this is an example of, we have enter a number, enter the number of integers in the list. So let's say that there's 10 integers in the list. This would go from counter to less than 10. So limit would be what you enter here. So limit would be, like if I enter a 10, limit would be 10. And then the counter would count to make sure that we are less than the limit, so less than 10. So it gets X numbers, counter starts at counter starts at 0. So it goes to 10. So here they asked them to enter a number of integers, to enter 12. So you were able to input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 numbers. So that's using this while loop. It's just basically counting a certain number, a certain limit. And so counter here is being incremented by 1 every time. So we can do that here. We can say I plus plus, and let's say that our limit is 10. So this just counts from 1 to 10, and it stops when it's 11. And let's say that I want to start at 1. Oh, forgot my semicolon here. So it says semicolons expected. And so you just go down here, find the I plus plus, and put a semicolon at the end. Okay, so starting I at 1, I prints 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10. And of course, we have something has to make this false, and 11 is what makes it false. Okay, so this loop, it's used when exact number of entry pieces is unknown, but the last entry is a special value. So for example, if you ask the user, if you say, enter a number, and you ask them to enter a number, enter a negative number if you want to make the loop stop. So let's see if they have an example like that. So the sentinel value for this one would be -999. So the user has to enter -999 to make the loop stop. So let's do the same thing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user to enter a number. Enter a number. Enter a negative number to stop. Okay. Enter a negative number to stop. So here, I'm going to check to see so I'm going to have to get that number. Let's see. Let's go back to here. Let me copy. Okay, so we have, trying to see if it lets me copy the code. Not letting me go. Okay, so I'm going to type in static scanner console system.in, and then I'm going to get some input from the user. Oh, it's not letting. Okay. So in this example, it's asking the user to enter a positive integer ending with a -999. So the user's just going to enter any number like 10, 20, 30, but the minute the user enters a -999, the loop is going to stop. So here's, if the number is not equal to -999, just keep going and ask for input. Okay, a flag controlled while loop, while not found. So this would be like if I'm searching in a file and I'm looking for a certain number, and if I don't find that number, then I make the loop stop. So use when input is from files, sentinel value is not always appropriate. In an end of file controlled while loop that uses a scanner object, console to input data, console acts at the loop control variable. The method has next of the class scanner returns true if there is an input. Otherwise it returns false. So let's see if we have an example to show. So while console dot has next, num equals console dot next integer, sum equals sum plus num. So we're getting a number, and here we're just accumulating the number. Here we're printing the sum. So what's going to make this loop stop is right here, console dot has next. So if there's not another value, this is going to return true. If there is a number, this is going to return false if there's not a number. This is the Fibonacci formula, and it's showing you how to do that with the loop. So we say if nth Fibonacci is equal to 1, then current equals previous. Else, if nth Fibonacci equals true, then current equals previous 2. Else, counter equals 3. While counter is less than or equal to nth Fibonacci. And then here it says current equals previous 2 plus previous 1 equals previous 2 equals current. So here we're just assigning previous 2 to previous 1, and current, which is the first one plus the second one, we're assigning it to the second, to previous 2. And then we're counting. Okay, then we have the for loop. So that's it for the while loop. So for the while loop, the thing to remember is that it's going to check at the very top of the before it enters into the while loop, and it has to be true for it to enter. And then something inside the while loop has to be has to edit, either something has to make this, in this case, something has to edit this I for it to then make this false here. So at some point, this condition has to be false for it to exit the while loop. The next type of loop is the for loop. The for loop is a specialized form of the while loop. It simplifies the writing of count-controlled loops. So we don't need the for loop, but the reason that we have something called a for loop, because we can do what we can do with the for loop, we can do with the while loop. But the reason we have a for loop is because it simplifies the whole writing of the loop. So if you know that you want to count by 1, or you want to count by 2s, or by 3s, or by -1, like count backwards, you want to use a for loop. And so a for loop is going to look like this. So the for loop, it allows you to not only initialize, but allows you to also declare a variable. So I can declare this variable actually here. I can say int I equals 0. So I can declare it, I can initialize it to whatever number I want to start with. And then here's the condition. It checks to see if I is less than 10. And then it has the counter, or the, if you want to increment or decrement the variable. So it does it all here. So the way this works is that first it initializes I to 0. It checks to see if 0 is less than 10. If that's true, it prints I, so it prints a 0. Then it adds 1 to I, so now I is 1. It checks to see if 1 is less than 10. It is, so it prints 1, or I. Then it increments to 2, and it checks to see if 2 is less than 10. It is, so it prints 2. Increments to 3, it checks, true, prints 3. Increments to 4. And we keep doing this until we get to 10. We get to 9. 9 is less than 10, so it prints 9. Then increments to 10. 10 is not less than 10, so it doesn't print the 10. So this little loop here is going to, gosh, earlier I could copy and paste, but now it's not letting me do that. I don't know why. There we go. So this little loop here, we'll just print 0 through 9. So for I, now the only thing that's going to loop is going to be this one statement because we don't have a block. You could put a curly brace here if you wanted, just to really make it obvious that that's all that's going to be iterating. Okay, so we haven't defined I. We can define I here inside the loop. Now, if you define I inside the loop, that means that you cannot use I anywhere else. You could only use it in the loop. So the scope of I is just the loop. So over here, I is not recognized. So if I try to print I here, it's going to give me an error because it doesn't recognize it. So we're printing 0 through 9. If I wanted to print 1 through 10, then I want to start I at 1, and I want to say equal, less than or equal to 10. So now I would print 1 through 10. I can also, instead of doing plus plus, I can do plus. So first of all, I can do a whole thing. I can say I equals I plus 2. So I can do a whole equation here. And then here, it's going to print 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So it's incrementing by 2s. So I can increment by any number that I want. And I can also decrement, I can go down, I can do negative numbers, but then I need to make sure that I check for the right thing. So let's say that I start at 0, or start at 1, and I do I minus minus. Then maybe I'm going to stop it. If the number is, if I is less than negative 10. So let's run that. Oh, I need to start at a negative number. It would help. Less than, let's see. But equal to negative 10. So we start I equals 1 is 1. Oh wait, no, that's not gonna work. I'm trying to think of how we can go backwards. Oh, okay. So we're gonna start at 10. And then if it's greater than or equal to 0, and then I minus minus. There we go. Now we're going to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, the other thing, so here, let's see if I try to print I here, what happens? So it says the symbol variable I cannot be found. So I cannot be found because it's defined here. So if I want to print I down here, then I need to define it here. And I. And then now it allows me to print it. So it prints 10, 10 all the way to 0. And then this I is the negative 1. That negative 1 is what made it stop. Because negative 1 is not greater than or equal to 0. So the scope of I, if I do it here, if I define it here, is main, but the scope of I, if I define it here, is the for loop. Okay, so that is the for loop. And let's see if there's anything else that it talks about in the for loop. So let's look at the flow chart for the for loop. We initial expression. So a meaning like I equals 0. So you initialize the I. Then you go in, then you check to see if I is less than or equal to 10 or whatever it is that is checking. If it's true, it goes into the statement. Then it updates the expression that was this right here. So it updates, it increases or decreases, whatever you want it to do. And then it goes here and it checks again. If that's true, it does the statement, updates, and keeps going until false and exits. So this only gets done one time. Then we check, statement, increase, check, statement, increase, so on and so forth. So here's another example. It says the following for loop outputs the word hello and a star on separate lines 5 times. So I starts at 1, 1 is less than or equal to 5. We output hello, we output star, increase to 2, 2 is less than or equal to 5, print hello and star. So it does this 5 times. Here we don't have the curly braces, so it only outputs hello 5 times, and then it outputs the star 1 time. So this boom, 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 boom gets done 5 times. This only gets done 1 time because we don't have these right here. The for loop does not execute if the initial condition is false. So we saw that earlier. Update expression changes the value of the loop control variable and eventually should make it false. If it's always true, we're going to get an infinite loop. If logical expression is omitted, it is assumed to be true. For statement ending in semicolon is empty. So if you end a for loop in a semicolon or a while loop in a semicolon, then it's just not going to do anything. So you can't put a semicolon here at the end. It says, in this example, a for loop reads 5 integers and finds their sum and average. Consider the following programming code in which I, new num, sum, and average are int variables. So I0, I is less than 5. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this loop iterates 5 times. It reads an integer from the console and it accumulates it in sum. So here we're looking at how we can do the same thing with the while loop that we can do with the for loop. But notice how many lines of code you got to have to make that happen. So this int I equals 0 can be, here we have it in the loop, here we have to have it outside the loop. Then here we have the condition I is less than 10. Here's the incrementer. Incrementer has to be here. So we can do the same thing, but the reason we have the for loop is that we want to use the for loop if we know that we're counting something at X number of times. While loops are usually things like while it's not the end of the file. You could do while the user enters an invalid passcode. You know, like if you don't know how many times something's going to happen, use the while loop. But if you know exactly how many times it's going to happen, use the for loop. Okay, let's take a look at mm, oh, okay, so this is a for loop. It starts at 1 and it goes n number of times. So n number of times would be like if you ask the user, how many numbers would you like to enter? And you'd say 10. So n could be like 10 here. And then number equals console next in. So we get a number, we print the number, and then here they're checking to see if the number is even. So this is to check to see if the number is even. Because if you do %2, remember it returns a 0 if there is no remainder. So if it's 0, it's an even number. If it returns a 1 or a -1, it's an odd number. So this is just checking for even numbers. Here it's showing that you can also do it with an if statement instead of a switch. So you can say if the number %2 is equal to 0. So let's say the number is 10, 10% 2, 10 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. 0 is equal to 0. So we're counting to see how many even numbers we have. We enter. And here we're also counting how many they end in zeros, else. If num %2 is not equal to 0, then it's going to be an odd number. Okay, the last loop that we're going to look at is the do while loop. The do while loop, it goes into the loop without a condition. So the loop gets iterated one time at least, and then it checks the condition at the bottom right here. We typically use these type of loops when we're, for example, checking to see if the data the user enters is valid. So we would say do, and we would ask the user, enter your passcode, or enter an even number, right? And then, or enter a positive number. That's easier. I'm trying to think of something easy. So do enter a positive number. Then here we would check to see if the number is positive. If it's not positive, we can go back and say enter. It repeats. So we could say while not true, while not a positive number, keep asking the user to enter a number. So usually the do while loop is really good to use when you are validating data. So we're going to process a statement, then check to see if the condition is true. If it's true, we'll process the statement again. If you look back here, do is reserved word, while is reserved word. We have open parentheses, close parentheses, and then a semicolon at the end of those parentheses. Really important to have that semicolon there. If it's not there, it gives you an error. It is actually required to have that semicolon there. So here's an example. We start at 0. I would not use it for this, but they're just showing you how it works. So you'd print the 0, you'd increment to 5, and then you would see is 5 less than or equal to 20. Do while loops can be used again to input validation. This is really what we use it mostly for. So here's an example of input validation. Int score, do system.out.print, enter a score between 0 and 50. Score equals console.nextInt. So they grab that score and then they check to see, is the score less than 0 or is the score greater than 50? So it looks like it says, suppose that a program prompts the user to enter a test score, which must be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 50. If the user enters a score less than 0, like a -2, or greater than 50, like a 51 or a 52, then it's invalid. So it looks like this test score, usually test scores are between 0 and 100. Not this one. This one, you just get 0 to 50 points. 50 points is the max points that you can get. So if they enter something less than 0 or greater than 50, then it's invalid. So it keeps asking the user for the value. So let's go ahead and practice that one, because this is something you want to be able to do, is check data. Okay, so int score. Let's say instead of asking the user, I'm just going to go ahead and type a score here, 49. Do. So with a do while loop, I go ahead and just yeah, go ahead and put the open and curly braces and then put the word while. And then typically, this is how you'll see how they structure it. They'll do this while. And then, so let's just do something different here. So I want them to enter a score, and I want the score to be between 0 and 100. Print line, enter a score. And so tell the user what it is you want between 0 and 100. Okay. And then you would get the score. So we're going to do score equals. I've not defined console, so console.next integer. And I guess I'll just set this to 0, since I'm going to ask the user to enter it. And here's where we're gonna, so I want to keep asking them if they enter something less than 0. So while score is less than 0, or not and, because remember, if you put and, you're saying that a number can be less than 0 and greater than 100, and the number cannot be two things at the same time. So if score is less than 0, or score is greater than 100, and don't forget my semicolon there, I should have put that earlier, then go ahead and ask again for a score. So scanner console equals new system.in. Okay. Okay, so it's telling me cannot find the symbol scanner console. So what would I be missing up here? So I'll have to import a package. And what package would I need? So it's java.util probably, or java.io. Okay, let's see what the problem is. I don't even have my book here in front of me. So let me look back here. The program that I was trying to do. That one. Okay. Maybe I have the wrong one. Yep. Okay, so enter a score between 0 and 100. So I'm going to enter a good score like 45. And it's not going to do anything because it's a valid score. So let me go ahead and just say valid score. By the way, these right here, you can put comments. You can say end of main, excuse me, method. And here you can say end of class. And it helps you see when you start having so many curly braces, it helps with that. So here I'm gonna put system.out.println. What was that input? Oh, valid data. Okay, so I'm gonna enter 55. It says valid data, but then if I enter a -2, try writing that again. -2, it keeps asking me enter a score between 0 and 100. Okay, if I enter 102, it keeps asking me. So it keeps iterating until I enter something that it likes, like 45. Okay, so that's the for loop. So those are the 3 loops that we have available to use. So make sure that you try those 3, you practice with the 3, and then you're able to understand like how each one iterates and what it outputs. By the way, we do have the names of some of these. So the do while loop is called a post-test loop because it actually is testing at the bottom of the loop, where the other 2 loops you're testing before you enter the loop. So those are called pre-test loops. So the do while loop is a post-test loop. The do while loop can be used for input validation. And then we can look at how to choose which loop you want to choose. So all 3 loops have a place in Java. If you know, or the program can determine in advance the number of repetitions, remember we're going to use the for loop. So if you know you got to iterate 10 times or 20 times, use the for loop. That's the first one. If you do not know, and the program cannot determine in advance the number of repetitions needed, and it could be 0, then the while loop is the right choice. If you do not know and the program cannot determine in advance the number of repetitions needed, and it is at least 1 time, then use the do while loop. Because remember, the do while loop you can enter at least 1 time. So it's got to be at least once. Like, get the data. Is it correct? Yes. Wonderful. Exit the loop. So you've got 3 loops. We can do everything with the while loop, but again, we compared the while and the for, and we saw how the for you have everything in the parentheses. It reminds you of everything that you're needed to iterate a certain number of times. You don't have to have so much code. And the while loop, it can cause errors, because if you forget the counter, then it's going to be an infinite loop. But with the for loop, you can't forget the counter because it's required. And remember, with the do while loop, we usually use that one for validating data. We can all use it for menu. Like, you can show a menu, ask, because you're going to ask 1 time, enter a value from the menu, then check to see what they entered. So you could use that one. Yeah. Okay, guys, that's all I have for the loops. Let me know if you have any questions. Just send me an email. Thank you. Yeah. I didn't call you, baby.